This chapter 34, verse 16, we're going to lift this out of the history of the very early days of the formation of the tribe of Israel. This happens during the time when Jacob is an older man. All of his 12 sons have got children. They're all grown up. And so his family's kind of turned into a tribe. They're living in the land of Canaan. And there's a dispute that occurs between his tribe, his family, and another local tribe. And to settle the dispute, the other tribe comes to them and proposes an alliance. So I want to read this one verse. That's what this is about. This is being spoken by the leader of the other tribe to Jacob, to the tribe of Israel. Listen carefully. Then will we give our daughters unto you, and we will take your daughters to us. And we will dwell with you, and we will become one people. In the Old Testament, tribes, nations would exchange daughters in order to blend their cultures together, because they understood that daughters who become mothers hold the power to shape society in the cradle. Daughters are the real key to making societies either stronger or weaker. Sons can defend nations against their enemies, but daughters who become mothers to the next generation can protect and elevate a society in a way that sons can't. Let me say to you this morning, there is no treasure more valuable to a nation than the culture of its daughters. If you're a daughter today and you're a young daughter, you haven't become a mother yet, listen to what I'm saying, because you are America's great national treasure, and you probably don't even realize it. But hopefully by the time I'm finished this morning, you will realize how significant, how important you are. To affect a society for either good or to affect them in an evil way, simply gain control of that society's daughters. Because the spirit of the next generation exists in the character of our future mothers. Daughters, listen to me this morning. The devil knows your value. He knew exactly where to go to get control of the human race. He didn't single out Eve because she was ignorant or because she was weaker. He singled out Eve because the power of influence as a mother over each generation was within her. Satan knows that if he can damage you, he can damage the future. Let me repeat that. Take that, put it in your lexicon, and understand when you watch the world around you and you relate with people, that Satan understands the dynamic of daughters who are going to transition one day into mothers. If he can damage the culture of daughters, he can damage the future of the nation. For at the very core of your being, you who are daughters, God has installed in you what every child needs. And you may ask, well, what is that every child needs? Every child needs the spirit of belonging. Some of you know what it's like to grow up without a mother's love, without a mother's nurturing, and know what it's like to have to reach out for that spirit of belonging, that sense of belonging that brings settlement and security in your heart. You know what it's like to grow up without that. And you have to look elsewhere for it. But within the culture of daughters, God has divinely installed the provision of the spirit of belonging. Because when a mother has loved you, she installs a sense of belonging that settles into the center of your being. And why is that important? Because what you will become will stem from your being. Your being launches and develops your becoming. You know, there's a universal law, and it's been true throughout 6,000 years of human history. It has been demonstrated down through history, and that law is simply this: selfishness stunts growth, but sacrificial love is expansive. Think about it. Proverbs has many sayings that deal with that, but he that gives and lends and gives out will always have an abundance, but he that withholds will basically shrivel up and shrink. So if a society wants to grow and expand, it needs to be nurtured by selfless, giving, sacrificial, loving people. Selfishness will stunt the growth, but sacrificial love is expansive. And that's why the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. Show me a culture and a society that begins to turn towards selfishness, begins to become ingrown. I'll show you a nation, an empire that is in decline and about to be swallowed up and cast on the garbage heap of history. Every failed culture, every failed civilization failed because a selfish leadership led that nation. Show me a culture, show me a nation being led by the spirit of motherhood, that unselfish, sacrificial love, and I'll show you a nation that is in the ascendancy, growing, and is going to expand. Keep that in mind when you vote this November. You know, the fertility of a virtuous culture that multiplies for generations to come is cultivated under a mother's hand before it is ever influenced by a teacher or another figure. Mothers impart that generosity to our hearts. You know, in order to give you and I a sense of worth in our life, God designed mom to care for you before she cared for herself. You didn't realize it when you and I were small. Perhaps in our little toddler confines, our crib, or even growing up, we were aware of what mom did for us, but we weren't aware that she did for us before she did for ourselves. And by that, God instilled within us a sense of self-worth. I know that even though I was raised in a non-Christian home, a godless home, the values of God were there in my mother's care. There's no story in the Bible that quite expresses that selfless giving, sacrificial giving, as the story about Solomon and the two mothers. How many of you remember that story? Two mothers, both with newborns, slept in one bed. In the middle of the night, one of the mothers rolled over and suffocated her child, a tragedy. When they woke up in the morning, there was a dead baby and a live baby, and the mother who had smothered her child grabbed the other woman's baby and said, "This baby's mine. This is my baby. I'm sorry about what happened to your baby." And they began to argue. And they ended up bringing their case to King Solomon, who was the wisest man that ever had lived or ever will live. And in the wisdom of Solomon, he listens to the two of them argue their case. And he says, "Bring me a sword." And so one of the guards brought him a sword. He said, "Lift up the baby, cut it in half." He said, "Give half to that mother, give the other half to that mother." The woman who was not his mother said, "Sounds fair to me." But listen to what the woman who was his mother said. Then the woman whose son was alive said to the king, because her heart yearned for her son, "O my lord, give her the living child, and by no means put him to death." But the other said, "He shall be neither mine nor yours. Divide him." Then the king answered and said, "Give the living child to the first woman, and by no means put him to death. She is his mother." How did he know that she was the mother? Because she said, "King, don't kill him. I would rather see him go and live with this other woman than to be put to death." You see that bond, that caring, the ability to lay down, forsake, lose the thing you love the most, that your child might do well. You know, mothering is a lot more than a biological thing. It's a divine thing. It is a God thing. The gift of motherhood is rarely convenient in the woman who bears it, because she doesn't bear the gift of motherhood out of her own convenience, but she does it according to the needs of those who depend on her for everything. So she's giving out of our need, not out of her own convenience. You know, we celebrate motherhood, by the way, not only among women who've borne children, but also women whose mothering instinct has nurtured neighbors' children, and has instinctively nurtured the children of others and borne the burdens of society. That is also motherhood. Remember in the Old Testament the prophetess Deborah. In Deborah's day, Israel had been beaten by enemies so terribly that people began to empty the villages and go into the hills and the forests and live. And so the villages were empty, and God raised up a mother to bring Israel back from that terrible condition. He knew what it would take. And in Judges 5 and verse 7, it says of the prophetess Deborah, "There were few people left in the villages of Israel until I, Deborah, arose as a mother for Israel." I think that's what America needs today. It's a real, true spirit of a godly mother. When sermons on Mother's Day are given, the story of Moses' mother, Jochebed, seems to always come up and is always told. So I'm not going to pass it by. Can't pass up the opportunity. We all probably remember the story of Moses, how that Pharaoh commanded the Hebrew midwives that had helped to birth the Hebrew children. The two midwives, Shiphrah and Puah were their names. Pharaoh commanded them to kill all the male babies that were born. But those two midwives refused because they feared God more than they feared the king. And instead, they went and they told Pharaoh, "I'm sorry, we can't comply. Those Jewish women, man, they can kick out babies because they're having those babies before we can get there and assist with the delivery." So Pharaoh says, "Fine. If I can't rely on the midwives, I am ordering every Egyptian soldier to kill every male baby born in Egypt by throwing them into the Nile River." But Jochebed, Moses' mother, who obviously had just born him, he was just a toddler, an infant rather, she nursed him secretly in her house for 3 months till she couldn't conceal him any longer. And then she put him in a protective basket and she set him in the Nile River and set him floating down the Nile River. And she ordered his older sister, Miriam, to watch the basket and see where it would go. When Miriam watched the basket, she saw that it came to a halt near the patio where Pharaoh's daughter lived. And Pharaoh's daughter picked the basket up and found Moses and took him. And so she revealed herself to Pharaoh's daughter. And she said, "I can get a Jewish woman to come and help you and nurse him. Would you be interested?" And the Pharaoh's daughter, obviously, she had no way of nursing him, said, "Of course, that would be awesome." So she goes back and gets her mother, Moses' mother, and she says, "Pharaoh's daughter's got him." Moses' mother ends up then nursing and nurturing Moses in his stepmother's house, the daughter of Pharaoh. So, from the courage of the midwives to the saving love of his mother who risked herself to keep him alive, to the strategic actions of his sister Miriam, and the compassion of Pharaoh's daughter, the life of the man who would deliver the Hebrew slaves and lead a new nation under God was shaped by women who rebelled against evil because of their faith in God and risked their lives with a mother's love. That divine combination of faith and love produces the fierce courage that we see instinctively rising in mothers. We see it in women who become mothers to adopted children who would otherwise spend their lives rejected in orphanages. We see it in mothers who stand for God before unbelieving husbands in order to raise their children to know the Lord. We see it in mothers who make a priority out of preparing their children for life over pursuing their own careers and interests. And today, perhaps more than at any other time in my lifetime and in yours, it's no wonder that it's mothers with the heart of a lioness who are going into our school boards, our legislative halls, our public forums, and leading the fight to save our nation from demonic corruption. Have you noticed in the past few years, women are leading the charge? Moms for America. Congress is being filled with brave women that are rising up, leaving whatever careers they had, and going to Washington, D.C. to fight against evil, fight for righteousness. You know, with imperfections or lack of education or refinement, mothers can come short in a lot of ways. I love my mom, and she had her flaws and faults and came short in a lot of ways. And I think when you think of your mom, as perfect as she may be, aside from the unbelievable glowing things you're going to write in the cards that you're going to give her today, the reality is that she is filled with imperfections. She's got flaws, and but somehow the thing that she has, the thing that she is, just eclipses all of those shortages. Love, well, Paul wrote it like this: now abides faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. John said, love never fails. It is that agape of God that is characterized by a mother's love. So she can come up short in a lot of ways, but I'll tell you, many grown children, like you and I, remember the first person who was our hero. Our first hero, when we look back on a mother who hid her sacrifices and concealed her exhaustion in order to adapt herself to us without holding it over our heads. I mean, I remember my mom saying, "Oh, can I just get a nap? Go play." But I never felt like she was begrudging me the work that she did, the things that she did. You know, you might have had a mom like mine that I got slapped upside the head more times than I care to count. But that's how I learned that I needed it. And boy, I did. I really did. But let me tell you, I never doubted that incredible sacrificial love that my mom had for me. And I hope that it was like that for you. Now I want to wrap up by saying this: God makes his first appearance in our lives through a mother's sheltering love, giving us a chance to grow up in security. Therefore, those who have been blessed by a mother's love can say, before I knew God, I knew Mom.